of Allah Azza wa Jal coming down on the day of judgment in order to judge the creation. And he brings a number of ahadith and a number of verses, including the verse of Surah Al-Baqarah, that Allah Azza wa Jal is going to come fi dhulali min al-ghamami wal-malaika, in groups of clouds and angels, that Allah Azza wa Jal is going to come down. And then Ad-Darimi says that, and I quote directly from the book, in my version it is page 93, and I brought this book so that to illustrate to you that this is actually a very interesting, a very safe, a very nice methodology that goes back to very, very early Islam, and it is found in some of the most ancient books of theology ever written. So Ad-Darimi says, all of these texts and ahadith that mention that Allah Azza wa Jalla is going to come down on the Day of Judgment and going to come down at these time frames, that he is saying, I have found all of my teachers accepting and believing in these traditions. And I have not found any of them rejecting them until, he's talking about another group called the Jahmiyyah. They came and they negated it, and they rejected what the Prophet ﷺ said. And they began to question, listen to this, they began to question, how does Allah come down on the Day of Judgment? Imam Ad-Darimi says, لم نكلف معرفة كيفية نزوله في ديننا. Allah has not asked us to understand how He comes. وَلَا تَعْقِلُهُ قُلُوبُنَا. Neither even can our hearts truly understand how does Allah come. وَلَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ مِّنْ خَلْقِهِ فَنُشْبِهُ مِنْهُ فِعْلًا أَوْ صِفَةً بِفِعَالِهِمْ أَوْ وَصْفِهِمْ. That, and neither is the anything of the creation of Allah similar to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, such that we can understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does. Rather, Allah comes down in a manner, in a qudra that He is capable of doing. And then He says, and this is something that Imam Malik also said, and Imam Malik died 179 Hijrah, even before Ad-Darimi by 2 generations. And many of the scholars said, he said, فَالْكَيْفُ مِنْهُ غَيْرُ مَعْقُولٍ وَالْإِيمَانُ بِقَوْلِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم في نزوله واجب. How Allah does it, we will not understand. But Iman in what our Prophet said that He will come on the Day of Judgment, it is obligatory. And none shall ask Allah about what Allah does, and we will be asked about what we do, and Allah Azza wa Jalla is going to ask us. And so in this very, very beautiful phrase, that the kayf, or how it happens, we do not think about. And one other interesting book as well, you've all heard of Imam Al-Tabari, already mentioned the name of Imam Al-Tabari as well. And Imam Al-Tabari wrote many, many books. He wrote the book of Tafsir, which is one of the earliest books of Tafsir. He wrote a very big book of history as well. And he also has a book on Islamic theology. Very interesting. He has a book on Islamic theology, and it is called Tafsir Ul-Nuha, Tafsir fi Ma'alim al-Din, or it's also called Tafsir al-Nuha Ma'alim al-Huda, the two names to it, but the famous name is At-Tafsir fi Ma'alim al-Din by Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari. And on page 145, and al-Tabari is the one who wrote the famous tafsir, he also says that Allah Azza wa Jal will come on the Day of Judgment, and he mentions وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ وَالْمَلَكُ صَفًّا صَفًّا, and he mentions هَلْ يَنظُرُونَ إِلَّا أَنْ يَأْتِيهِمُ اللَّهُ فِي ظُلَلٍ مِنَ الْغَمَامِ وَالْمَلَائِكَةِ, and he mentions هَلْ يَنظُرُونَ إِلَّا أن تأتيه الملائكة أو يأتي ربك أو يأتي بعض آيات ربك. So he mentions 3 verses from the Quran, all of which mention the coming of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says rhetorically, are you going to believe in these verses, or are you going to reject these verses? Are you going to believe, or are you going to accept? And then he goes on and he says, of course we will accept what Allah Azza wa Jal is saying. And then he interestingly says, some people said that what is meant is that Allah will not come, but rather the command of Allah will come. وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ, the command of Allah, not Allah Himself. But then he says, look at the verse, وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ وَالْمَلَكُ صَفًّا صَفًّا. Allah and the angels are going to come in ranks. So he asks in this verse, when Allah is saying the angels are going to come, are you saying no, it's not the angels, it is the command of the angels. If you say that it is the angels, then why can you not affirm that Allah Himself is going to come down? So this is an interesting narration from Al-Tabari himself, where he is basically also affirming that. No, of course, when Allah is saying, وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ, this means Allah Himself is going to come. Now, this is one interpretation. It is the interpretation of one school of Sunnism, and it is definitely found in many, many early treatises of Islam, and it is defended by later scholars as well, of the likes of Imam al-Dhahabi and Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim, and many of the scholars who followed that interpretation. It is not the only interpretation. There are other interpretations as well, and we find these interpretations, they go back to schools that are now called the Mu'tazili school and other schools as well, and eventually some of these interpretations were adopted by later schools like the Ash'ari school or the Maturidi school, and they said that, look, when Allah is saying وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ, we cannot affirm that Allah Himself comes. And we have, for example, the book written by the great scholar Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, the founder of the school. And al-Maturidi wrote another very early commentary of the Quran, and it is a commentary that is written around the same time as Al-Tabari's commentary. Al-Maturidi died around 310 Hijrah. So it is the same time frame as Imam Al-Tabari. And Imam Al-Maturidi, when he comes to this verse, وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ, your Lord shall come, he says that, and I quote you from the tafsir, that we cannot understand this to mean that Allah Himself comes. No, we cannot understand. وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ does not mean your Lord comes. Why? Because he says that Allah exists without a place. So we say that the commandment of Allah comes, or the judgment of Allah comes, or the reward and punishment of Allah Azza wa Jal comes. And so he said Allah Himself does not come. And of course this interpretation, it is the hallmark of the other strand of Sunnism, which is the Maturidi school or the Ash'ari school, and this is defended by later scholars like Imam al-Ghazali, Imam al-Juwayni, Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi, al-Baydawi, and other great ulama who followed that interpretation. Frankly, my sympathies are with the first school, but in the end of the day, the other school has existed, and we should not make this an issue where we should show any hatred or any animosity. If you want to follow the other school, then either way, I think we make a mistake, by the way. We make a mistake when we delve into this issue so deeply, and we forget the purpose of the verse itself. And this is a huge problem that both sides fall into. Both of these sides going back and forth, they forget the spirit of the Quran. Allah did not reveal these verses so that we debate over the reality of what does it mean, وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ وَيَأْتِي رَبُّكَ. Allah didn't reveal it. Allah revealed it so that we feel a sense of fear, of genuine terror, that Allah Himself is coming down. Are we prepared to meet? It wasn't revealed that you start debating and bickering, what is the reality and what is this and what is that. So I think that sometimes both of these interpretations and their defenders do a disservice to the ummah,